My mother-in-law set 7 places at the table. There were 8 of us. So Janet picked up June's plate, walked it to the laundry room, and set it on the dryer like a thing to be stored. She thought a 7-year-old was the easiest person in that house to move. By the end of the night, she would be the one standing on the porch in the cold. But what made the whole room go silent wasn't what my husband said. It was the 2 pieces of paper I set on the table first. "This table is for blood," Janet told me, smiling. She had no idea I'd been keeping the books. "I'm Megan. I'm 34. I keep other people's books for a living, and I'd kept the peace in this family for 3 years. Not anymore. We live in Millbrook, in a narrow blue house with a kitchen that never quite warms up. June's drawings cover the refrigerator edge to edge. Greg is a calm man with sawdust permanently in his cuffs. He runs the floor at a cabinet shop 2 towns over. I married him 3 years ago when June was 4. His 2 older kids, Tyler and Hannah, stay with us on weekends. I love that house when it's full. I love it more when nobody's keeping score. Nobody had bothered to add up that I was the one keeping it running. I scheduled the dentist visits, remembered which cousin was gluten-free. When Greg's parents needed something, the request came to him, and the money came from me, quietly. I'm a bookkeeper. Tracking what goes out and what comes back is just how my brain rests. Every family has one person who keeps the lights on. That person was me, and not one of them had done the math on what that meant. It took a 7-year-old standing in a doorway to show me, you don't keep the peace by paying for it. You just teach people the peace is free. Sundays, we drove 25 minutes out to Cedar Hollow, where Greg grew up. Janet keeps a clean house and a cold ledger. From the first dinner, she had a way of saying June's name that put a little space around it. "And how's Megan's girl?" Never our June. Tyler and Hannah got the good chair, got told they had the Walsh nose, the Walsh stubbornness. June got told to be careful on the stairs. The Christmas before, Tyler and Hannah each had a stack of gifts. June had one small box, the kind you'd give a neighbor. Janet smiled. Children shouldn't be spoiled. Roy studied his coffee. There's a refrigerator in that house too, bare metal, Tyler's school photo, Hannah's ribbon. Not one of June's drawings, though she brought a fresh one every visit. I'd find them later in the recycling, smoothed flat, like Janet couldn't quite throw them out, but couldn't quite keep them either. To Janet, blood wasn't sentiment. It was the only deed that couldn't be foreclosed. I understood her too well to hate her, so I let it slide, telling myself a child can't feel a temperature she's never been told to name. June felt it. She just didn't have the word yet. Roy's heart could not wait. 2 years back, his cardiologist put him on a fistful of pills, co-pays running close to $500 a month. Then the roof in Cedar Hollow gave out, $6,000 to replace, more than they had. Roy's pension covers the basics and not much else. So the help started with one transfer, I told myself was temporary, the medication, then groceries when the medication ate the grocery money, then the roof in installments so it wouldn't show as one frightening number. Greg knew. Janet assumed it came from his wages. I never corrected her. That would have meant a conversation, and conversations in that family came with a bill of their own. I logged each payment, because logging things is what I do with my hands when my chest is tight. Month after month, it added up into a quiet, heavy thing I carried without looking at. There's a kind of giving that curdles when you keep it secret too long. It stops being generosity and starts being evidence. Don't mistake my silence for softness. Once I sat Janet down and told her plainly, the cold shoulder stopped now. She folded her hands and asked if I'd brought the receipts for Roy's prescription. Once I told Greg I was done funding a house where my kid ate last, my thumb over the recurring transfer, ready to end it. That was the week Roy landed in the ER with chest pains. You can't shut off a man's heart medication to win an argument with his wife. So I closed the app. Greg asked me quietly to give his mother more time. He's a peacemaker, and peacemakers are wonderful until the peace they're keeping is built on your daughter's back. I gave it. Hate doesn't get tired. It just waits for an audience. There was something Janet didn't know, something Greg and I had been building for a year. The spring before, Greg sat on the edge of June's bed while she slept, watched her a long while, then found me in the kitchen and said he wanted to make it real, father on paper, in court. Because we'd been married over a year and her biological father had signed away his rights long before, the process moved without a contested hearing. 6 weeks before the birthday, we drove to the courthouse. The judge asked Greg if he understood adoption made June his child in every legal sense, his heir, no different from Tyler and Hannah. Greg said yes before the judge finished the sentence. June got to bang the little gavel. Her name is June Walsh now. We were saving the news for the moment it would land hardest and kindest. Greg's birthday. Janet announced she'd host the party in Cedar Hollow, her table, her rules, with Greg's sister Brenda handling details. Brenda is 40, recently divorced, and orbits her mother like a moon that's forgotten it used to have its own light. I offered to cook, to bring the cake. Brenda said in that bright voice that's really a closed door that they wanted to keep it family this year. I let it go, but I ordered the cake anyway, with white frosting and strawberries, and had the baker pipe 8 names on top. Greg, Megan, June, Tyler, Hannah, Janet, Roy, and Brenda. On the phone, Brenda asked if we'd need a kids' table, then answered herself. Probably not. I should have heard it then. The chairs were already counted in a house I didn't control. We drove out on a gray Saturday, the cake box belted into the middle seat. June wore the green dress she'd picked herself and held a rolled-up drawing on her lap. A surprise for Daddy, no peeking. Janet met us at the door with a hug for Greg, a nod for Tyler and Hannah, and a "there she is" for June that didn't quite reach her eyes. The dining room had the good china, the heavy silver that only came out for blood occasions. I counted the chairs, the way I always count a new room. 7. I counted again, because the first count is never the one I trust. 7. Brenda caught me looking. We're a little tight on space this year, not meeting my eye. Exactly enough seats for everyone except one. June stood in the doorway, doing the same math, and moved a little closer to my side. Before dinner, neighbors came by with a card for Greg. Janet lit up, put a hand on Tyler's and Hannah's shoulders, and presented them. These are the grandchildren. June stood a few feet away, holding her drawing, waiting to be introduced. She wasn't. June tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, am I a grandkid too?" I knelt on Janet's polished floor and told her yes, that she was somebody's whole world. She nodded the way kids do when they want to believe you and can't quite. Behind me, I heard Janet in the kitchen say the thing she'd say twice more before the night was through. "This table is for blood." June heard it. I watched it land on her, watched her file it next to the bare refrigerator and the recycled drawings. She just got very still, the way I get still. Greg missed all of it, out on the porch talking gutters with Roy and a neighbor. I made a calculation, the kind I make all day with other people's money, the cost of waiting against the cost of erupting, and chose to watch a little longer. I kept June close. In my bag, flat against the lining, was the manila envelope, and beside it a folder I'd printed the night before, telling myself I wasn't really bringing it. 3 years of transfers, dated, totaled, sorted by category. You don't bring your books to a birthday party unless some part of you already knows the party is going to become an audit. Dinner was ready. While Janet carried in the roast, Brenda drifted over and suggested, all reasonableness, that June might be more comfortable in the den with the TV. I said June was comfortable right here with her family. Brenda's smile tightened and got to the actual point. The photos afterward were for just the grandchildren. The real grandchildren, she said, and didn't take it back. This wasn't Janet improvising. This was planned. Roy saw it coming. He'd come in from the porch and lowered himself into his chair. He watched Janet call June over. "Janet," he said, "she's just a little girl. Let her sit." The most he'd said on the subject in 3 years. Janet didn't even look at him. "Stay out of it, Roy. I'm handling the table." And he did. Before Janet could steer her toward the den, June crossed to Greg and unrolled her surprise. "Happy birthday, Daddy!" A drawing of all of us, 5 figures holding hands, labeled Mommy, Daddy, me, Tyler, Hannah. Greg got down on one knee. "This is the best present I've ever gotten." June glowed. Janet glanced at it. "That's a nice drawing, sweetheart," in the voice you'd use for a stranger's child. "All right, dinner's getting cold." June needed the bathroom before dinner. While she washed her hands, I dug for a tissue and the manila envelope slipped out onto the tile, face up. The decree, the county seal, the judge's signature. In the matter of the adoption of a minor child, June Walsh, parent, Gregory Walsh. Finalized adoption makes the child a legal child in every sense. Inheritance, name, everything Tyler and Hannah had by birth, and no dinner table on earth could repeal it. I made myself a quiet promise. Tonight, if Janet put one hand on my daughter, this paper was going on her table face up in front of everyone. Not as a weapon, as a fact. Dinner was called. Tyler and Hannah took their chairs. Greg was waved toward the head of the table, and Brenda put her hand on June's back to steer her toward the den. Greg had ducked into the kitchen for the cake and didn't see it. I crossed the room, but Janet intercepted first, putting her own hand on June's shoulder over Brenda's. "The children who belong at this table will sit at it, pleasant, for the whole room to hear. June can eat in the den, it's nicer for her." The table went quiet. "I already know why she's staying at this table," I said, level. Janet's pleasantness hardened. "Megan, let the real children sit with their father tonight. It's his birthday." Her hand stayed on June's shoulder, pointed toward the door. "There's no shame in it. She's just not—" She paused, chose the cruelest honesty. "She's not his. Not really. Everyone here knows it." June stood frozen under her grandmother's hand, not understanding all the words, but understanding the shape of them. Janet reached for her anchor. "This table is for blood." Third time. I didn't plan what came next. I just knew, the way you know the floor is there in the dark. My hand went into my bag. Janet, misreading me, moved June toward the door. Not a shove that would bruise, a push that said, "You are a thing I can move." June planted her feet, stumbled, caught the door frame, and the drawing, forgotten under Greg's arm, slid loose and dropped between them. 5 figures holding hands, face up on the hardwood. Nobody spoke. Hannah's eyes filled. Tyler's chair scraped as he stood. Roy half rose and sat back down. I crossed the room, Janet's second mistake, thinking I'd kept 3 years of records for nothing. I picked up the drawing first, smoothed it, then picked June up onto my hip and set her down behind me where the door couldn't reach her, my hand flat on her back. I straightened up between my daughter and her grandmother and said it slowly enough that every person caught each word. "Don't you ever put your hands on my child again." Janet blinked. "I'm her grandmother. You're going to want to think very carefully about the next thing you say." Greg appeared in the kitchen doorway with frosting on his thumb, read the room all at once, and too late, and set the cake plate down very carefully. "What happened?" he said, flat, like mine. "Nothing happened," Janet said. "I asked June to eat in the den, and Megan made a production of it." Tyler's voice cracked across the room. "Grandma pushed her. She pushed June into the door." Greg looked at his son, his daughter, the drawing creased on the floor, the best present he'd ever gotten, and something settled in his face, quieter and far more final than rage. He walked around the table and stood beside me. "Tell me exactly what my mother just did." Janet dug in instead of backing down. "That child is not yours, Gregory. You took on Megan's daughter, fine, that was your choice. But don't ask the rest of us to rewrite the bloodline. Your real children, Tyler and Hannah, they're Walshes. They'll have this house someday. I won't sit here and watch you hand it to a stranger's kid playing dress-up at my table." The word stranger hit Greg like a slap. Brenda found her voice. "Mom's right. Blood is blood." "I did decide," Greg said, quiet still. Roy looked up from the tablecloth, his old face gray. He knew what was coming. Here's the thing about keeping the peace for 3 years. You teach everyone around you that the peace is free. I looked down at June, then at Greg, and he gave me the smallest nod. 3 years of letting it go ended in that nod. I took out the manila envelope first, walked to the table, to the empty place where June's chair should have been, and started talking in the even voice I use for clients who need the truth without flinching. Janet, for 3 years I've sat at your table and listened to you decide who counts. I'm not keeping the peace anymore. Love isn't blood, it's who shows up. Let me show you who's been showing up. I laid the decree face up on the cloth, turned so she could read it. That's a court order. 6 weeks ago, Greg adopted June. It's finalized. Her name is June Walsh. By law, she is his daughter, not his stepdaughter. The same as Tyler, the same as Hannah, which makes her your granddaughter, Janet, and his heir. Equally. Janet's hand went to the edge of the table. You can't just... We did. A judge signed it. There's no one to argue with because June's father gave up his rights years ago, and Greg stood up in that courtroom and took them on purpose. The color left her face. Tyler grinned. So June's really our sister now? Like, for real? She was always your sister, Greg said. Now the law agrees. Hannah took June's hand, but I wasn't finished. I took out the folder and laid it beside the decree. Open to the summary page. 3 years of my handwriting and arithmetic. You said this table is for blood. Let's talk about who's been keeping the blood fed. I touched the first line. Roy's heart medication. About $500 a month for 2 years, because that's what the co-pays run and his pension doesn't cover it. Down the page. The roof the winter it caved. $6,000. Paid in installments so it wouldn't frighten anybody. Groceries when the medication ate the grocery money. The water heater. The property taxes. Twice. I turned the page to the running total, underlined twice. Just under $40,000, Janet, over 3 years. And not $1 came from Greg's wages. It came from me. I've been paying to keep this house warm the whole time you've been deciding my daughter doesn't belong in it. Roy, gray-faced, said the thing he should have said years ago. Janet, it's all true. He'd known. He'd said nothing because saying something meant facing what it meant. Janet did the only thing left to a person whose argument has collapsed. She got loud, snatched her napkin off her lap. How dare you bring money into this? Into my home, at my son's birthday. You think a checkbook makes that child blood? Get that paper off my table. This is my house. I will decide who sits at this table. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. That's the only part that ever wins. I'm not raising my voice, Janet. I don't need to. The numbers already did. I didn't bring money into this. You did. The day you decided some children eat at the table and some eat by the door. I just wrote down what it cost. Greg set June's drawing down on the table between the decree and the ledger, smoothed it flat, and spoke in the low, even voice he'd handed down to his daughter without either of them knowing it. You pushed my daughter out the door. I sat in a courtroom 6 weeks ago and swore to be her father for the rest of my life. Tonight, in my mother's house, you put your hands on her and shoved her toward the cold like she was nothing. So here's what happens now. We are going to walk out that door together, all 5 of us, and the checks stop tonight. Every dollar that's kept this house warm came from the woman you just humiliated and the child you just called a stranger. If June isn't family, Mother, then neither is the money. You don't get to feed off this family and spit on half of it at the same time. Janet went white. Roy put his hand over his eyes. Brenda sat down hard. The inheritance she'd been policing all night suddenly revealed as a house her brother's wife had been quietly keeping afloat. Janet reached one hand toward Greg, the only son who'd ever protected her from herself. For the first time in his life, he didn't take it. Happy birthday to me, he said, almost gently. I'm spending it with my family. He picked up the drawing and the decree, handed me the folder, and lifted June into his arms. We didn't storm out. We gathered our things quietly, the whole room watching. Then Tyler stood up from the table he'd been told all his life was his by right. "She's our sister. If June can't sit here, I don't want to either." He walked over and took June's hand. Hannah followed without a word. The two real grandchildren had voted with their feet, and Janet's whole bloodline had picked the stranger's kid. We walked out the same front door Janet had tried to push June through an hour earlier, all 5 of us, on our own feet. Behind us, nobody spoke. Janet stood at the head of her perfect table with her 7 place settings, watching the family she'd spent 3 years sorting into real and not real walk out her door as one unsorted whole. In the car, halfway home down the dark county road, June finally spoke. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Greg said, his voice rough. "You did everything right just by being you." She fell asleep before the highway. The checks stopped that week. I closed the recurring transfers I'd set up 3 years ago. I'm not a cruel person. Roy's heart is still bad, and I won't punish an old man's arteries for his wife's pride. So I set up something new. A direct line to the pharmacy that covers his essential medication only, paid straight to them. Nothing that passes through Janet's hands. It comes with a condition in writing, because I write everything down. The day she's willing to call June her granddaughter and mean it, we'll talk about the rest. Until then, the door stays open only from our side. Roy called once, alone, and said he was sorry in the cracked voice of a man who knows sorry is a down payment on a debt he can't fully pay. Janet hasn't called. Brenda hasn't either. The hallway in Cedar Hollow still has its wall of grandchildren, and June's photo will never hang there. That's their loss to live with now, not my daughter's. Our refrigerator in Millbrook is still covered edge to edge with her drawings. Last week she added a new one, 5 figures holding hands in front of a blue house labeled the same as always: Mommy, Daddy, me, Tyler, Hannah. She's started signing them too. June Walsh. Blood decides who you're related to. Showing up decides who your family is. And I've learned to keep very good records of exactly who shows up. If someone in your life keeps score of who's real, show them who shows up instead. Share this with a mother who's had to stand her ground in a doorway. Comment who shows up below and subscribe. We'll keep the door open. We'll keep the books. We'll see you next time.